could still have a big market approach to doing things in a smaller community.
I can't wrap my head around everything that you do.
I like the adrenaline rush that directing gives you.
That's a quarter of a century, everybody.
The band's called Twisted Chrome.
Nobody talks to you about that in journalism, do they?
I don't think so.
An inside look at the people in front of and behind the cameras at NTV on this episode of Inside NTV.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Inside NTV, the YouTube/podcast show where we talk to current and former NTVers to see how they're doing, talk about their jobs, all that fun stuff. And I have to divulge that I'm extra excited this week because I'm a Pittsburgh guy, north of Pittsburgh, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. But Sheila Hyland joins me. She anchored here at NTV, I believe, in 84 and 85. Is that correct?
That's correct. Boy, that seems like a long time ago. Like,
I feel bad about.
Can we just say, maybe 94 or 2004?
If you want,
That was a
we can do
long
that.
time ago.
I was going back and forth in my head if I wanted to mention the next part where I was really looking forward to this one because I kind of like grew up watching you on the news.
It's all right. It's okay. I get it.
But Sheila
Thanks,
Hyland,
Christian.
yeah, you spent 20 years, over 20 years on Pittsburgh airwaves. You were at WTAE Channel 4, the ABC affiliate there, for people who don't know, and then Fox 53, WPGH, the Fox affiliate, obviously. And then you spent a little bit of time at KDK, right, the CBS?
I did. Yeah, I did a brief stint on the morning show there. I was actually filling in for somebody for a few weeks. And then I decided that I needed to have my life back, and I got out of television. Television is difficult, as you know, when you're trying to raise a family. And my kids were fairly young at the time, and I just wanted to be home for them more. So I went into business for myself, and that's how I ended up out of television. But people say, "Do you miss it?" And I say, not necessarily, but boy, did I have some good times. I really did, and especially starting out at NTV. Those were my formative years. Well, it was really only a year, but it was a formative time for me.
So go back to that. How did you get to NTV? Walk us through the path. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure where you were born. I know you went to the University of Nebraska, so I want to hear about that too. But how you got to NTV?
Well, let's start out. I was raised in Portland, Oregon. So how the heck did I end up in Nebraska, you would ask? Well, my grandparents were from Nebraska. My mom was born there, and then when she was just a toddler, they moved out to California. So that's where I was born. But I'd always had a fascination with Nebraska, always wanted to go back there and visit because my grandparents had been from there. And my grandmother had moved back to Nebraska, and I went to visit her when I was a teenager and really fell in love with the Midwest. I mean, it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. And I knew that I wanted to get into broadcast journalism after about a year of college on the West Coast. And I thought, okay, where can I go and get my degree? And I knew that they had a really great journalism program at University of Nebraska. And I thought, okay, why not? And so I hopped on a plane, sight unseen, showed up at the university and started taking classes and never looked back. So then fast forward, I graduated in 84, a long time ago. And I really actually wanted to get into radio. I didn't know that much about television, but in the course of taking broadcast journalism classes, you study both radio and television. And my thought process was, okay, whoever offers me a job first, whether that be radio or TV, I'm going for it. And it so happens that I got a job interview at NTV, and the interview was during finals week. It was the one thing that kept me from getting a 4.0 that semester because I didn't have time to study for my psychology exam because I was there for the interview, but it all turned out really well. So I was offered the job. I started 2 days after I graduated, and I was the morning anchor at that time, doing AgMart AM. Do they still have AgMart AM?
I don't know. I don't think so. We have the morning show. We have the noon and a little thing called Good Life. We do ag markets, but I don't think we have that though.
Yeah, well, we did a lot of the markets. But yeah, that was a fun experience too. I'd never talked about farm markets, and yet there I was doing the farm markets as an anchor. So that's how I ended up in Kearney, Nebraska. I graduated from University of Nebraska. They offered me a job. I said, heck yes, let's do this. And I moved to Kearney.
And you said you spent about a year here, is that right?
Yes. And in that time, I went from a morning anchor to the noon and 5 anchor to then the weeknight anchor. It went very quickly. As you know, well, your viewers may not all know, but you can move up a little more quickly in smaller markets than you can in larger markets. And so that was the case with me. So I was very fortunate.
That's awesome. Can you remember any of the stories or any of the stuff that you had a chance to cover or anchor while you were out here?
I did do reporting as well. I do remember carrying my own equipment and being my own, photographer, so to speak, and my own editor, because we didn't have anybody to do that for us. I don't remember too many of the individual stories, except for my very first day. I covered a story in which some high school students were building a house, which I thought was pretty amazing to begin with. And I only remember that first story, partly because the news director told me to go and do a package on this story. And I said, okay, sure. And I walked out of his room, out of the newsroom, walked back into his office and said, what's a package? That is, of course, the story that reporters put together. It's a package deal with sound and tape. And we never used that term when I was at broadcast journalism school. So I'll always remember my first day there. But I do remember some of the people, and one of them is Bob Bowie. He was the main anchor, and everybody knew Bob Bowie in the area. And I was 21 years old, fresh out of college, anchoring beside Bob, who was probably around 60-ish. And he kind of felt like my dad. I almost like I just didn't belong there, but he was very gracious and he was just a terrific anchor. I learned a lot from him.
I never got a chance to meet Bob, but I know the legendary stories about Bob Bowie because he worked here at NTV and at Hastings eventually. And just the amount of people that he touched. And when he passed away, that was a big deal.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, we were in the TV guide back in the day. There's a little ad, a black and white ad of us, Bob and me together.
Very cool. When you left NTV, you didn't go straight to Pittsburgh, right? You went on the stop, correct?
I did. I went to Oklahoma City, KWTV, the CBS affiliate there. So that was my stepping stone to then get to a bigger market. And I got that opportunity after I'd only been at NTV for a year, which was fabulous. But I could have used a little more experience under my belt before I moved to Oklahoma City. I felt a little bit like a fish out of water there. In fact, back when I was at NTV, we didn't have live shot capabilities. So, you could be live anchoring the news, but you couldn't be out in the field reporting live. So that was the first time I'd ever had the opportunity to do that, was in Oklahoma City. And to say I was nervous is an understatement.
I bet. I mean, that just real quick, that feels like, would you advise a young person to take advantage of the time at a small market where they start type deal?
Absolutely. I would say 95% of people have to start out in a small market anyway. I mean, it's very, very difficult to break into a larger market if you don't have the experience. So yes, go into a small market, work hard. I mean, I remember working from, I'd get in about 2:30 in the morning to produce the morning news, and then I'd go report in the afternoons. I also did the Sunday night news. So I was working all the time, but that was all really good experience. And in a smaller market, people are a little more forgiving. The audience is a little more forgiving. The news directors are a little more forgiving. So that's where you can make some of your big mistakes and hopefully not get fired.
And from Oklahoma City, then was Pittsburgh, correct?
Then was Pittsburgh. So I came to Pittsburgh in 1988, which again seems like forever ago. And I never left. I had opportunities to go elsewhere, but it's just kind of like your experience in Nebraska. You went to Nebraska and you just stayed. You know, you get to know people, you get to know the community, and you just feel like it's home. So I never left. Although I have gone back to Nebraska though. And in fact, I went to NTV maybe 20 years ago, and they gave me a tour of the station. It didn't look anything like it did when I was there. I mean, we're going back into the dark ages when I was there.
Well, I will tell you, if you make another trip out to Nebraska, out to the Kearney area for some reason, we just debuted our brand new set today as we're taping this. So,
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh
flashing
gosh,
and
I
binding,
definitely need to come back and visit again.
we will make that happen. If you can make your way through, we will definitely do that.
I would love that.
So now looking to Pittsburgh, obviously. So that's the
Mhm.
bulk of your career, 20 plus years. How did, I want to hear about some of the stories that you did there so people know what you were up to. But how
Mhm.
did the NTV experience specifically get you ready for Pittsburgh, for top 25 market, big time stuff?
You know what? NTV, again, because it was a smaller market, gave me opportunities I couldn't get anywhere else. For instance, that morning show, it was me by myself. I mean, we did have the weather person, but I was getting in at, as I said, like 2:30 in the morning. I was ripping the wires because obviously back then we didn't have computers. I was ripping the wires, typing on a typewriter, the stories all by myself, picking out slides, literal slides to use as, you know, graphics, and writing the stories, producing it. I mean, I was doing everything. And then, as I mentioned, I'd go out in the afternoon with a camera on my shoulders, a light kit, and reporting. So I got to immerse myself in every aspect of the news business. Even in a medium-sized market, I wouldn't have been able to do all that. I mean, I got to do everything there. I got to anchor, I got to report, I got to edit, I got to shoot. And so even though I was only there for a year, as I mentioned, I worked myself up from morning anchor to noon to 5 to the main anchor job. So I was anchoring 5 days a week as well. I probably got 3 to 4 years worth of experience in that 1 year at NTV. I would not, I literally know I would not be where I am today or have gone as far as I did in my career had it not been for that experience at NTV. I mean, I will always hold a special place in my heart for that station. Always.
That's awesome. 1988, you get to Pittsburgh.
Mhm.
So I was refreshing my memory. So I was doing some YouTubing and whatnot, getting ready for the conversation today. And a lot of fun stuff. Hard news stuff, obviously, but also you were part of sports coverage too. I mean, Pittsburgh's a giant sports town. So it's not just the sports reporters, you're getting news folks involved too. A lot of stuff that you had a
Mhm.
hand in.
Yeah. In fact, I had never been to a major league sporting event in my life until I moved to Pittsburgh. And the first day that I had my job interview, the news director actually took me to a Pirates game. And you can imagine what that was like. Like, wow, here I am in this big city and I'm watching Major League Baseball. As soon as I saw Pittsburgh, I thought I really want to live here, partly because it reminded me of my hometown of Portland. But yeah, major city, major events. The city has become smaller since I moved here. In market size, TV market size, we've gone from 14 down to, I'm not even sure now, 26, 27 or so. But it's still considered a fairly major city. And yeah, we've had some incredible events happening here in Pittsburgh. One of them that I remember, I'll never forget, of course, was 9/11, because we had one of those planes that were taken hostage that flew over essentially Pittsburgh and crashed, as we all know, in Shanksville. But the concern was that one of those planes was headed to the city of Pittsburgh. And so the whole city was almost panic stricken back then. And I was on the anchor desk, and for 4 days straight, it was morning, noon, and night, just nothing but coverage, nothing but coverage, nothing but coverage. And it didn't, the ramifications of what really happened didn't hit me until I went home that Friday night after 9/11, after we, covered the news all week. And it really hit me what all had transpired and what we all went through all over the country, but particularly here in Pittsburgh too.
I can only imagine what that would have been like from your perspective as a news anchor reporter trying to cover something horrific like that.
Yeah, it really was.
Another story that sticks out to me, because I remember watching it, I've lived in the area, obviously, the Q Creek miners in West Virginia. I mean, that was almost the opposite. It was very scary, but had a very happy ending.
Yes.
What do you remember from that story?
Thank goodness that had a happy ending, because so many of those stories don't have happy endings, as we all know. So I think all of us really, I mean, I hate to say it, but I think we felt like this wasn't going to have a happy ending. And there was that feeling of just dread when we were covering it. Like, what's going to happen to these miners? I think there were 9 of them at the time. And it was a surreal situation. And knowing that the entire country, if not the world, was watching what was going on at the Q Creek mine. I wasn't at the mine itself because I was on the anchor desk. And then, ironically enough, I went away for the weekend, and the miners were still trapped, and they were recovered and they were all alive. And that happened, I think, on a Saturday or a Sunday. So I wasn't even on the news desk when they all came out alive. But it was a surreal experience, because interestingly enough, people sometimes forget that as news anchors, obviously we're human beings too. And we experience the same thing that our viewers are experiencing too. And that was such a happy moment to see those miners come out alive.
To fill in some gaps for some folks, I mean, you have done, if I have this right, more than 10,000 interviews in your career for television.
Oh yeah.
That's a few. Do you have
Just a few.
Do you have any specific ones that really stick out to you that you're like, yeah, this one's right here, and maybe it's, I don't know if it's the most important person, but it's definitely the one that sticks out type deal?
I get that question all the time. And I think to this day, I've never found just my favorite story, so to speak, but there are some that do stand out. One of them was when President Clinton was running for office. So he wasn't yet president. And he flew into not even our main airport, but Allegheny County Airport. And you're obviously familiar with that because you're from Pittsburgh. But we didn't have any interviews lined up with him. He was just coming in to go to an event and leaving. The reporters were kept outside of this fence, and the president-elect at the time, Clinton, got off the plane. And we're probably, I don't know, maybe 100 yards from the plane. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to go for it. So I yelled, "Mr. Clinton, Mr. Clinton, we want to talk to you." And so he came over and we got a one-on-one interview with him, because I screamed at him basically to come over and interview. So that stands out in my mind. I don't even remember what I asked him or what the interview entailed, but I was impressed with the fact that he came over and talked to us. I also got to interview one-on-one President Gerald Ford. That was actually back in Oklahoma City. And that felt very special to me. And I really felt the warmth of him as a human being. Another interview that stands out is I was covering a murder in Pittsburgh. An elderly man had been murdered in his home. And so naturally, as reporters, we go and we talk to the neighbors. What did you see? What did you hear? Etc. So I was talking to a neighbor that lived next door to the man that was murdered. And I was asking him, so what was this man like? And he said, oh, he was a wonderful neighbor. He would always do things for you, help you out. We really liked him. We had been friends. And I was like, thank you very much. I put together my story. Well, wouldn't you know it, that the neighbor actually was the man who killed his neighbor, the one that I had interviewed. So we had this exclusive interview with a murderer, and that going back, you think, I was talking to somebody that actually killed another human being and didn't know it at the time. But yeah, that one stands out as well. So it runs the gamut.
I can definitely see where you will never forget that one.
No,
Wow. Wow.
no. And I hope nobody else has that experience.
Good heavens. What are the more fun things that you've gotten to do in the TV business, whether it's Pittsburgh, Oklahoma City, or here at NTV?
Mhm. You know, I remember Michael Jackson was in town giving a concert. This was probably in the late 80s. And my job as a reporter that day was to go around the city and try to find Michael Jackson, like what hotel he might be in, or if he went to any eating spots or whatever. I just think looking back now, it seems so bizarre, but I got to do fun stuff like that. I got to cover all kinds of races, sporting events, opening day for the Pirates every year. I covered the last day of Three Rivers Stadium before it was imploded, and we got 2 new stadiums. I also was about 8.5 months pregnant too, and so I kind of looked like the Michelin Man out there. Trying to think what else. I've interviewed some celebrities that were kind of fun. Kathleen Turner, the actress, she was here doing Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. For those of your viewers who are older, you may remember the Carol Burnett Show, and Tim Conway and Harvey Korman. They were 2 staples on that show. They came to Pittsburgh and I got to interview them, and I just had a blast with them. They were so funny. So lots of little stories like that I got to do and cover, people that I got to meet.
That's awesome. Now you're not in TV anymore. You have a different job. You're still in the Pittsburgh area, but
Right.
you are an executive coach. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us
That's,
a little bit
yep,
about what that is?
sure. That's my main job right now. Some people might say, well, how do you get from television to being an executive coach? So in 2006, I started my own business called Foster Hyland and Associates. And I did at the time media training and crisis communications. And that's where we would go into companies and corporations and train their people in how to be on television, how to be interviewed, what to say, how to protect their reputations, what to do in case of a crisis. So I had worked with hundreds and hundreds of executives in that business. And after a while, you sort of understand what makes them tick, where their weaknesses are, what they need to work on, etc. So a few years ago, one of my clients said, you know, I'd really like some executive coaching and I'd like you to do it. And I thought, okay, why not? And so I started doing executive coaching. I'm just a couple weeks away from getting my certification from the International Coaching Federation in executive coaching, so that I can at least put, you know, that behind my name. But that is the majority of my business right now, and I absolutely love it. I really love it.
You've got a lot of other stuff like nonprofit things and corporates. If you run down those a little bit real quick.
Sure, sure. I work with a nonprofit called Luminari, and we run educational summer camps for teenagers. So we have an ambassador camp in which the kids learn about diplomacy and conflict resolution, just kindness and civility. And that camp takes place in Pittsburgh for a few days. And then we take the kids to Washington, D.C., not just to visit monuments, but they get to go to foreign embassies and meet with diplomats and foreign ambassadors. In fact, the last 2 years, they got to meet the ambassador of Ukraine, which was pretty fascinating when you consider that, you know, they are in war right now. We also have a music camp. It's not just about playing music, it's about engineering, producing, the business of making music. And then we also have a cooking camp. It's a very gourmet cooking camp. And on the last day of the camp, which just ended last Friday, the kids did a little competition, just like what you'd see on TV, where we give them ingredients and we say, go to it, and they have to make something out of it. So I'm involved in that too. And also with Pittsburgh Children's Advocacy Center. We're still trying to get off the ground. It's a grassroots organization that basically deals with child abuse prevention and also the after effects of child abuse and neglect. And finding help for those kids and their families.
Fantastic. How do you have time for all this stuff?
I don't. I don't. I'm actually trying to do a better job of balancing things in my life. But, you know, it keeps me going. It keeps me young, or at least I want to think that.
I would say that for sure. It's probably definitely the case. I do have one question. We talked about this before, and we were messaging back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
To give a little background, so we are recording this 2 days after the assassination attempt of Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
which is in the Pittsburgh market for people who don't know.
Yeah.
Not that it matters, but that's my hometown. So
Right.
I have a connection there. I was literally there a few weeks ago visiting my parents. I wasn't at the farm showgrounds, but whatever, 5 miles away.
Right.
As a TV news anchor reporter who in the Pittsburgh market, you didn't cover this, so I'm not saying to touch on this specifically.
Mhm.
How does something like that compare, or what goes through an anchor, a reporter, when I mean, the last time something like this happened was Reagan in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
How does an anchor reporter deal with this? How does a newsroom deal with this? What does this mean for a Pittsburgh television station? Like, how does that even, what is the mechanics there?
Well, as you can imagine, a lot goes into that, because while you can try to anticipate events like that, you can't. I mean, you're sending a photographer and a reporter, or a couple of them, to cover a story, to cover the presidential visit, which is a big story. It would lead the news that day, regardless of what happened. But when something like that happens, you call all hands on deck. So every reporter is called in, the anchors are called in, the photographers are called in. And then it's just a mad rush to find witnesses, to find public officials who can talk about the event, reporters to try to uncover what happened, to try to get video, people that, maybe had cell phones and took video of the event. It's just a massive undertaking. And that's when I think a news operation really shines. They are bringing that information to people in real time, and it happens just like that. And for the news anchors, I give them a lot of credit to be able to sit on the set for sometimes literally hours on end, as they did here in Pittsburgh, and just go over the news and take new information and dispel it to people, say, this is what's going on, and bring in reporters, and because at that point, nothing is really scripted. It's very difficult, but that's when news people are at their best. So kudos to our local news teams for covering that. And also keep in mind, this happened on a Saturday when most newsrooms are at a skeletal staff. So they had to call in everybody. But yeah, just a tragic thing that happened here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I know about the
Yeah.
weekend stuff. I was watching the ABC because we're an ABC affiliate, and
Mhm.
David Muir obviously wasn't anywhere to be seen on the anchor desk for national on Saturday. He showed up on Sunday because they had time to get stuff together. But that was just kind of what you run into, I guess, when it happens on a Saturday, and no one is expecting something like that.
Right. And you can't, but as I said, you do in some ways have to anticipate that something like that could happen. And what do you do in the event that it does? But yeah, no one could have anticipated that. And you think it happened out in Butler, which is just, a sort of a rural area, but just right outside of Pittsburgh. We have wonderful people that live in this area, as you know, because you were raised here. It's just something completely unexpected, out of the ordinary for here.
Sheila, before I let you go, I don't want to end on that note. I want to end on something fun. So
Okay.
what was your favorite thing about living in central Nebraska? Like, do you have a memory outside of work that, whether it's Kearney or Hastings or Grand Island or Lincoln with University of Nebraska, what would be that first, like, that's a lot of fun. That's what I want to think about when I think of Nebraska.
Well, I don't know if this counts, but again, having grown up on the West Coast, when I could drive somewhere and see cornfields everywhere, I mean, I'm not kidding. That is just such a sight. I love that, just, that flat Nebraska ground, and then you see cornfields everywhere. Also, NTV I mean, it was miles out there, and there was nothing in between where I lived and where the television station is. I don't know if that's changed. Maybe there are actually people living between, Kearney and the television station. But I remember that drive at 2:30 in the morning. It was just absolute nothingness. I mean, as dark as could be, and just, you could see the stars. And I just thought, this is God's country. That's what comes to mind. Just God's country, beautiful land. And I loved the people in Nebraska. In fact, many of my friends are from Nebraska that I met at college. I'm actually going to my 40th college reunion with friends of mine coming up in a couple of months. So it is near and dear to my heart. I've been back there several times. I will be back there again in the future, and hopefully not too much longer. And I'm going to come visit you.
That sounds good to me. We will have the door wide. Well, we'll have to
Love
sign
it.
you in and do all the security protocol, but we'll get
Well,
you in.
yes, understood.
Sheila Hyland, this was my pleasure. I appreciated you taking all this time with me today and being able to talk about your time at NTV and at the big time over in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Well, thank you so much for asking me to do this. I was really excited when you got a hold of me, because I do have such fond memories of NTV, and I love that you're from Pittsburgh and that you've stayed there.
Yep, I've got friends out here, and I can go visit my family and stuff back in
Yeah.
Butler, but I like it here. It's just nice. I like the 60 miles in 60 minutes, kind of like what you were talking about with the cornfields and all that.
Yes, yes.
It's nice. I always will have Pittsburgh and Butler here, but I really enjoy it out here.
Well, thank you again. And to those who are watching too, from Nebraska, just know that I was honored, very honored to have worked there. And I just will always think special things about Nebraska and my time at NTV.
Awesome. Sheila Hyland, thank you so much. We will have another episode of Inside NTV next week.